Welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, October 19th, 2022. My name is Drew Clark. I'm the editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and very excited to welcome our guests to a very fascinating, actually, I tweeted about this earlier. I kind of made a joke, taxes yawn, right? But it's actually very, very important, right? It's a very timely and topical matter. And this is something we need to address right away. It's a kind of a critical, time-sensitive matter. And but before I get to our topic and introducing our guests, I would like to just remind everyone who we are, what we do, and why we do it. So we are a publication, a news and events company, Broadband Breakfast. Our motto is Better Broadband, Better Lives. We report every business day on matters pertaining to higher capacity internet and the use of that infrastructure. And one of our landmark or signature events is this one. Obviously, many of you are repeat visitors. Thank you for coming every week. And for those of you who aren't, we hope you'll continue to come back every Wednesday at 12 noon for Broadband Breakfast Live Online. As I was just starting to mention, we have a very exciting conference coming up, an in-person event, Digital Infrastructure Investment Washington. And this will be on Thursday, November 17th. You can see all about it at broadbandbreakfast.com. And go to the right-hand side and you can see the Digital Infrastructure Investment, or DII, Washington. We will be at Clyde's of Gallery Place. Many of you know that. That's where we've had our Broadband Breakfast events, both our breakfast and our lunch events. And this time you'll get both. You'll get both breakfast and lunch at Digital Infrastructure Investment Washington on November 17th. We're going to be focusing on bringing the leaders in the broadband operation space with financial services. And obviously the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act kind of is over all of this, right? It's a big role. It's playing a big role, driving a lot of aspects of the discussion in broadband right now. And so that will clearly be a part of it. We're super happy to announce moderators that we have for the event. We'll be announcing more speakers, keynoters, sponsors as we go forward. But just briefly to kind of remind people, we're starting off by talking about the state of IIJA. That's our first panel, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. That will be moderated by Gabriela Novello, assistant editor at Communications Daily. Then we'll have a second panel on broadband mapping. Are we on the right track or the wrong track? Our third panel will be financing mechanisms for community broadband. And that panel will be moderated by Christopher Mitchell, director of the Municipal Broadband Networks Initiative of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And then I will moderate the closing panel, which will be a financing roundtable, how venture capital, private equity, and institutional investors are watching digital infrastructure. So again, I encourage you to learn more. You'll be hearing a lot more about that on Broadband Breakfast over the next 5 weeks, but mark your calendar for November 17th, Thursday, from 8:30 in the morning till about 3:30 or so in the afternoon. Secondly, I just want to remind you again, as I said, we do these free events. The Digital Infrastructure Investments, a paid event, $299 for an all-day event. As I mentioned, breakfast and lunch at Clyde's. This event, our Wednesday at noon event, is free, and we are grateful to the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast that allow us to do these events every week. Our sponsors include Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, Lightbox, Geo Partners LLC, Ookla, BroadbandToolkit.com, Michael Baker International, Pinpoint Capital Advisors, Bitstream Communications, Positron Access, and the California Emerging Technology Fund. Thank you to our sponsors for your support that makes this possible. And then let me just send one more link to you all that you can follow this. Those of you who are on Zoom, and we are on many platforms, so those of you who aren't on Zoom won't see this, but you can find it by going to broadbandbreakfast.com. And that is the link for our upcoming events. We try to be on top of the news. This event is an example, but we're going to be addressing events from how to value your fiber company, workforce development measures, what to expect at the digital infrastructure investment event that I've previewed just a little bit about, as well as broadband mapping and data, which of course is something we could talk about forever. Well, with that, I want to thank our two guests for being with us. Let me open the view up to everybody here. If you're watching on Zoom and you don't see all three people, let me know. And when we try to kind of give everyone a little spotlight. So we're going to start with our guest. Once again, the topic of today's discussion is on taxing broadband grants, right? And this has become a bit of a big issue, right? I mean, and even though there's a lot of funds coming down the pike through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, $65 billion for broadband through IIJA, 42.5 of that through the BEAD, or Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. And that's where a lot of the focus has been. But the question is, should these grants that are coming through these programs be taxed, right? And Senators Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, and Jerry Moran, Republican of Kansas, less than a month ago, introduced the Broadband Grant Tax Treatment Act that would shield federal broadband money from being taxed. And we're going to talk about that. Is that justified? Is it important? And why? And to do that, we're going to hear from Leif Ovesen, excuse me, we got the name right, Vice President of Legislative Affairs for NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. Leif is as the Vice President of Legislative Affairs, he oversees NTCA's Government Affairs Department, including legislative analyses, advocacy outreach, and political engagement. And prior to joining NTCA and being a panelist at a prior Broadband Breakfast Club event, Leif, or maybe it was after he joined, but in any case, Leif, previously to joining NTCA, worked in both the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. So look forward to getting your kind of on the ground Capitol Hill perspective on this issue, Leif. And then following Leif speaking for a little bit, we're going to hear from Jill. I apologize. Is it Cooney? Is that how you say it?
It looks Cooney. It's Keeney.
Keeney. Okay. Jill Keeney. And she's the CEO of Canokla Networks. And if you haven't figured that out, it took me a few minutes to figure it out. That stands for Kansas and Oklahoma, right? Which is right where you're from. And you're a member-owned cooperative serving South Central Kansas and North Central Oklahoma with fiber to the farm technology. I love it, right? So as well as some fixed wireless footprint. So looking forward to your perspective, maybe on the other side, like if Leif's in the Washington and Capitol Hill, you're going to talk to the on the ground perspective of Kansas and some of the interaction you've had with your Senator Jerry Moran. So with those words of introduction, Leif, let's turn it over to you. Why is this an important issue, and will we be able to get legislative relief within a time period that makes it work?
Thanks, Drew. And before the rest of you joined, Drew and I were joking. The last time I did this was about I think it was just a few months into the job at NPC after leaving Capitol Hill. It's about 13 years ago, and I've been invited back. So I don't know what that says about how good a job I did then. But in all seriousness, NTCA has my colleagues have participated in these breakfast events many times. It just hasn't always been me. And Drew, you do a great job. And all the topics you discuss for your upcoming events are things that I'm working on and Jill's working on, and I know many people on this call are working on, whether that's workforce issues or mapping. And so it sounds like you have a good slate of things for people to join in the near future. But yeah, so quick reminder why we care about this. So NTCA, Rural Broadband Association, about 850 small rural broadband providers all around the country. NTCA was very busy up on Capitol Hill, like so many other telecom associations and companies were representing their members, trying to figure out how we finally solve this problem of getting all the unserved people in this country with service. And as we all know, many of them are in rural areas, whether that's Kansas or elsewhere. And the debate during the infrastructure bill and debates related to other COVID era funding bills that included funding for broadband, largely was around where should the money go? You know, should certain technologies be favored? What should the speed threshold should be? What's the speed threshold for determining if this area is unserved? And things like that. And I think somewhere a bit not lost on everyone, but I think kind of overshadowed with some of those other issues was this issue of even if we do get the dollars out the door, the fact that, and we can talk about the history of how we got here, that those grants are going to be taxed. So in a sense, the dollar figures, whether you're talking about the $42.5 billion for the BEAD program or the larger amount in the infrastructure bill, or the amounts in Reconnect, the $10 billion in Treasury's program, those aren't the true numbers that are actually going to be available to serve the unserved and upgrade networks. And so when, after the infrastructure debate in particular, when congressional offices came to us, and I know they came to others who represent providers, said, you know, what else can be done? Is it more money? Are there regulatory issues? And certainly all that is on the table. We can have debates about whether or not the funding that has been approved is sufficient or not. There are certainly issues related to red tape and permitting and things that are going to slow things down. But one of the lowest hanging fruit items from NTSA's perspective, if you really want to make the most of the money that has already been allocated and soon will go out the door in the coming months and years, is to revisit this idea of whether or not recipients of the grants should be paying a portion of that back to Treasury, and what that means for these communities. So that's a quick history of how we got involved in the conversations we've been happening, and we're thrilled to see Senators Warner and Moran introduce a bill to do exactly that.
Wonderful. I will hold my questions until we get Jill's on the ground perspective, but I do have many, and I'm eager to dive in here. Jill, let's let you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about how you got interested in this issue.
All right. I'm Jill Keeney. I'm CEO of CanOkla, which is half Kansas, half Oklahoma. I've been with CanOkla for 30 years. I've seen it grow and trying to grow right now, and taking care of our neighbors who have been left behind. I'd say about 10 years ago is when we started noticing that difference too, as the larger ISPs started pulling away. I'm involved because I feel the closer the decision making is to the ground level of where this is taking place, it is a different perspective than possibly of those from afar that may think certain things, but maybe they don't know. So when we did host Senator Moran out to our new local hospital, and he lives in a rural area. He had to travel through the rural area to get to where we were. What I find with the taxing issue is we are going outside of our member footprint, so it is a taxable subsidiary, and carving out 20%, say average of a $50 million project, or say even a $10 million project, say 10 million, your taxed amount pulling away from that could be a whole community. I mean, we have some small communities that are waiting. And so who do you carve out first? The most rural, because they are the most expensive to reach. We have an area on the Flint Hills that we serve right now. Pioneer Woman is one of those where we have a fixed wireless connection to her. We're waiting to get that fiber built. The neighbor to the left, we just did a cost estimate. I mean, it was nearly $200,000 to reach 2 miles through rock if you're going to bury it. So what I'm finding is that's okay for some, but with our grant that we promised to build fiber to them, it's a struggle because you're going to pull that amount away from that, and then you're going to do less for the smallest areas. And I do not believe the theory that small deserves lesser is true, but I think it's the easy answer, and that might be floating through a lot of the what we're discussing right now, and how to get it all done. How do we get it all done? And that would not be to remove that last mile of those hardest to reach. It in all effort of, we do have a moonshot. This is a little bit of a different climate right now. Broadband isn't just one more utility. It does make everything else work. Could we do it now by removing those tax implications and just get it done? So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. So let's, we just got a question from Daniel Smith. We want to encourage your questions. And so it's actually along the lines of what I wanted to ask anyway. So what are the implications of ownership by a public entity, right? So does a municipality pay taxes on a grant? Does a co-op pay taxes on a grant? And you kind of alluded to this, I think, Jill, when you referred to you're going out of your area, so it becomes taxable. Could you speak to that? And then obviously a private entity, a private company would be paying taxes too. So let's just talk about the type of entity receiving funds and their tax status because of that.
Yeah, a municipality would not be paying the taxes on that. The co-op, it's a 501c12, would not be paying the taxes on that. Once you go outside of that area, you are a subsidiary that is a taxable subsidiary, and that's where the implication comes in. That's where the grants are being applied through, is typically your subsidiary competitive LEC. So then you're carving away more of that. You can do less with less. We're trying to do, as a rural lifelong out here, we always do more with less, and we're used to doing more with less, and we've been doing that for 71 years. We know how to get that done. It's just been that upfront cost of, can we do it right, durable, make it last for at least 30 years, don't have to worry about the ice storms, the tornadoes, everything else that comes up the middle of the country. So we typically bury it. We always bury it, and trying to find a way to get to that last person, which is what all of this seems to be wanting to do, is let's connect everybody. 95% isn't an A anymore, based on our, growing up in school. Yeah. It's the last 5% now. That's right. All that really matters.
Great point. Yeah.
Taking that to the extreme and trying to figure out how to do that, it's going to take some craftiness, but we live out here, all the time. And so we want that for everyone that is seeing the gap faster and faster. I did notice some new things happened last week that are affecting everybody. And it's typically a government service that reaches out, whether it's USDA. I'm married to a farmer, so I'm on the ag side as well. Everything's going online.
So what are you referring to last week, Jill, since you've raised this? What are you movement on this bill or something else? You just said last week.
The digital divide is widening quickly. Everything's going online to save money.
And last week it widened more, right?
What's that?
And last week it widened more.
It widened more quickly. All of a sudden, those that can't do it are still left behind in a worse, in a bigger gap.
Okay. So, let's try to zero in on this question. Leaf, do you have a reaction on the public ownership, municipality versus co-op versus a private? And as I understand it, you represent obviously a lot of co-ops and private entities. I'm not sure if you have municipalities within your membership, Leaf.
Yeah, that's great. Jill, neither Jill or I are tax lawyers or experts. We come at this from me being a telecom lobbyist, and Jill, 30 years in the business on the ground. So there are some things that we may have to avoid trying to answer. It gets too deep into an Internal Revenue Code questions. But this one, yes, she is correct. It's this is an issue for our commercial members, less so for our cooperatives, even though cooperatives can be structured in different ways. And so, yeah, there's a school of thought, and always has been, that maybe all this money should go to nonprofits, co-ops, municipals, and we think cooperatives are fantastic. They're a large segment of our membership, but over half our members are also commercial companies, and they have been as willing as our cooperative members to apply for grants and loans, whether that's at USDA. They're as interested in doing the job through BEAD or Treasury or any of these other programs. And so we treat them all the same. We think that both groups are going to do a fantastic job if given the opportunity, and they can both, leverage the dollars more if we can get this changed.
Yeah, but thank you. That was a great summary. But Jill, just to go back to what you said, you are a co-op. So are you saying that because you're outside of your area, it became taxable? Just walk us through, from your perspective, what you know of the circumstance. Where does it become taxable, and where is it not taxable if you build?
So extending out of your co-op, our co-op boundaries, that territory was formed back when we became a co-op in 1951. And that comes from the FCC. It's very defined on maps, where you are bound to be the provider of last resort. If anybody in those areas needs connection, you have to connect them. That is the deal we made. So there's several of us out here in the most rural of the rural areas doing that. What happens when you expand outside of that territory footprint is that it is competitive. Someone else was serving that. Anybody else could serve that. And so you're looking into those areas with a different, in our case, we formed subsidiaries to be able to do those areas. Those are not bound under the cooperative tax rules. Those are taxable subsidiaries. So that's what we use.
Thank you. Great to get into that details here. Another question. Again, let's ask them here. If you've got your questions, we'll ask them as soon as we can. Jerry Enright asks, are you aware of any state efforts to make tax exempt or deductible on a state basis for private entities? Leif or Jill?
Jill can maybe speak to Kansas, and it's not something we've been tracking state by state. We're a national association. We only do federal lobbying, but sometimes we do hear these things. But I can't, off the top of my head, I don't know of any. I can tell you that it was part of the discussion and the formulation of this bill, but whether or not states have their own grant programs. I'm not talking about state grant programs that are, like through BEAD, federal dollars are going to the states, and then they're going to decide which entities ultimately win those awards. And some of the other COVID era funding programs are structured the same, but some states have their own state funded grant programs. Those are not included in this legislation. There was some thought of whether they should be or not. I just think it's a cleaner, simpler solution. At least the sponsors of the bill thought this. I'm not trying to put words in their mouth. That just keeps this related to programs that were passed by Congress through the federal government, and so it is something that had come up, and it is left outside this bill. I think it's a bit of a kind of a jurisdictional question, but it has been part of the discussion. But no, to get the exact answer to the question, no, I'm not aware of any state efforts to do the same.
So let's just talk about the basic kind of so what question, right? Which is like, why should broadband providers be exempt from taxes on grants, when I am presuming, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Leif or Jill, but anyone else who gets a grant from the federal government is not going to be exempt from taxes, or are there categories where they are exempt wholesale that you're aware of? So like why special treatment, if you will, Jill, for broadband providers?
Yeah, I think every industry wants to feel like they're the most special at that moment. I feel like this right now is another step past what we experienced during COVID and taking some of those ARPA dollars, which did end up being in some states' programs, to get that broadband out before the BEAD came. So in seeing that, the gap and as it's growing and getting broadband out to everyone so everyone can take part equally in economic growth or connection to, education, healthcare, their government, how that needs to get out as a moonshot one-time chance. I do think that makes broadband more of a right now, let's do this right, let's do it massively, let's get everyone connected, and then we can grow as a whole country together in elevating everyone. It's become more of an equity and inclusion piece, which I count rural as that, because of back in the day of driving into a big city, to get resources. Now it's kind of turning the other way. So I'm in support of that, and doing more with less out in rural America. It would take this one-time front shot, and then, of course, after so much time, I guess we are not the most important industry anymore, and maybe that could be just a special exemption, like what we all saw during COVID. Things got pushed through quickly, for special reasons, for an emergency situation. So,
Leaf, what's your reaction to the question?
I mean, it's this constant discussion that since the beginning of time that always takes place is if you give one entity or industry or someone in a certain ecosystem an exemption from something, does that open a Pandora's box, a slippery slope, whatever analogy you want to use? And yeah, that's a fair argument. And I'm sure there are people who would like similar treatment, but as Jill said, after several years of listening to the public, say that they cannot function in modern society without broadband service, and then that message getting to members of Congress, and the members of Congress holding hearings and taking everyone to task about the fact that there isn't broadband throughout their states or their congressional districts, and asking us as representatives of providers and asking providers, through multiple hearings, what can be done, that this has to end. Well, this is one of the easier solutions. Again, like I said at the start of the call, one of the lower hanging fruit. And I do think it deserves, if you want to describe it as special treatment right now at this point in time in our country when we're trying to get everyone connected. This makes sense. Would someone else maybe deserve their exemption on their issue when the time is right? I'm sure they would say they would, but I think enough members of Congress have heard from the general public that they are beyond frustrated at their level of service or their complete lack of service, and they are looking for ways to solve the problem. And this is one of the easiest ways to do that right now. So I think a very strong argument can be made that this is justified.
Let's talk a little bit about procedures and process, right? And thanks for a little bit there, Jill, on the insight, and would love to hear more about, kind of how you got Senator Moran's interest in this, but talk about on the ground, Congress, just, I guess, basic civics lesson, right? If something is not passed by the close of Congress, it dies. It needs to start again on January 3rd of next year. And this has been introduced, as I understand, as a bill in the Senate. Is there a House companion to this bill? How many sponsors are there for either the Senate and if there's a House version for that one? Leaf, let you start on that one, and kind of where do you see the momentum going on this in literally only a few weeks time before the end of the congressional session?
Yeah, in an ideal world, I mean, I certainly would love to see the bill introduced earlier, but Congress, there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of members of Congress' attention is spread very thin on issues, but we still greatly appreciate Senator Warner and Moran taking the lead on this and getting it introduced. I actually am fairly optimistic. I mean, it's hard to get any bill introduced, as all of us know. Thousands of bills are introduced every Congress. Very few are actually signed into law. But again, given how important this is, there are many members of Congress that list, getting their constituents connected as their top priority, if not one of their top priorities. And this is one of those ways where we can really help get those people connected. And yeah, it's mid-October. Congress is not in session until we get back to the election, so we're just down to a few weeks. But the hope is that something like this will continue to build support when members of Congress get back, and it's something that could be added into an end of the year spending package or tax package or spending slash tax package. Those discussions are taking place in Capitol Hill right now about how we're going to keep the government open and fund the agencies before Congress, this Congress comes to an end at the end of the year. And it's bipartisan. It has, I think it's 6 original co-sponsors in the Senate. And to answer your question, in the House, no, there's not yet a House sponsor, in large part because the bill was introduced right before both the House and Senate left. There are conversations being had with House offices to figure out who would be the correct sponsor over there. Hopefully it'd be bipartisan again. I'm sure it would be. I think there's a little reluctance right now to maybe, do too much before the election because everyone's so focused on the election. So I think shortly after House members come back, we will likely see a House bill.
Thanks for that great background of the interplay and the political aspect of midterms. Jill, would you care to elaborate on that? Maybe back up a little bit and talk about how Senator Moran got interested in this?
All congressmen right now are so in tune with what's happening with the grants coming because of their states needing to set up their broadband office, or if they already had one. What we found in Kansas, we did go ahead and take that first round and try to do some practice rounds. And now we've had 3 years of some small grants awaiting the larger. He was very in tune with that. And so he was already aware of the urgency of that. I would believe any state right now, as they're undergoing that, different than any other year in Congress, probably at this time, especially approaching elections, is that at least they're all on the same page about it. They are so in tune with BEAD and broadband, the Jobs Act and all of that coming through, that it didn't take, I'm with Leaf on that. I don't think it'll take as long as in past years would have, because their attention span, their attention is divided into so many different things. But right now, broadband does happen to have a bigger urgency about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did you want to add to that, Leaf?
No, she's absolutely right. It's been top of mind for members of Congress. When I started in this industry more than a decade, or when I was on Capitol Hill going back to almost 20 years, there was a point in time where you had to convince members of Congress and their staff that broadband was something they should care about and everyone should have it. And it seems like a lifetime ago, but that actually was an argument we had to make. We are well beyond that. You cannot find a congressional office anymore that doesn't believe that broadband is important to their constituents, and it's not a partisan issue. It's just a matter of getting this on the calendar and getting it in front of the right people and attaching it to the right bill. When there are so many other things that they're also trying to get done before the end of the year.
So I want to raise another issue. This is on each of our events, we do post resources from either panelists or from Broadband Breakfast. And this is from an article that we reported several months back. And there's a lot of great quotes from people talking about this. And I just want to read one of them from Julie Darrington, Vice President of Consulting at Vantage Point Solutions. There are significant impacts when you start layering on all the different costs. She's talking about the BEAD program that we've been speaking about. When you think about the matching requirement, the taxable income, add in letter of credit costs, prevailing wages, when you start looking at all these pieces and parts, it really impacts the financials. From a financial feasibility standpoint, I'm concerned the profitability and the long-term sustainability of BEAD funding networks are going to be tough in many cases, especially in rural areas. Let me just broaden the lens a little bit. Okay, so putting aside just the taxable income question, what about these matching requirements? At least 25% match, letter of credit costs, prevailing wages, we could add environmental, studies. What is are you hearing, Leaf and Jill, concerns about some of the red tape, for lack of a better word, that comes with these, that is going to maybe deter use of these funds, or is really this taxable issue kind of the big kahuna, and we address this and we won't have problems with these others substantially?
I don't disagree with what Julie said. I mean, those are all issues we are monitoring. We have monitored. We have described to policymakers, if you're going to include some of these things, what it may mean, for the providers on the ground to try to follow those. Many of those decisions have already been made. They're in the law. They're in statute. Those were compromises made between the parties and Congress and the White House, some of which we may have had disagreements or wouldn't have liked to have seen. And now it's just to the point where we're going to have to make sure that agencies implement them in such a way that limits some of the burdens. I'm not saying that none of them should be in there, because some of those protections and rules and requirements do make sense. But the other thing I'd say that hasn't been mentioned here is, in addition to what Julie outlined, some of the quote unquote red tape issues, as you said, Drew, is also inflation and supply chain issues. You may have drawn up and we're seeing this with Reconnect right now. We would be seeing it with the BEAD and other programs too that have been implemented, but they haven't been fully implemented yet. Is that you may have drawn up a plan to serve your unserved areas, upgrade your areas, several months ago or a year ago. Well, the expenses to do that now have risen dramatically. So that also is a factor. And so, yeah, when you combine all of these things together, it does create increased challenges for sure. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you. Jill?
Absolutely. I'm not only hearing it, I think I'm the one saying it a lot, probably to everyone else. I am experiencing all of that. So when she wrote that, when I'm reading that off to the side chat, I always get a little bit of anxiety there, because it is everything that we think about every day. During the RDOF, I kind of won a small little pieces of that, and that had to back out because of the letter of credit costs were more than we were going to receive. So going down that road of all the legal costs and then the letter of credit costs just to prove that we could do it when we knew we could do it. And now in my Reconnect 3 and 4, trying to understand those extra financial feasibility, that what do you call it? The wage case.
Prevailing wage.
Mm-hmm. All of that layered in there, they said, well, that's going to increase your total project 10 to 30%. Okay, I really need to spend the money on the broadband itself and not a prevailing wage that I'm already spending and all the extra layers of bureaucracy that we're taking away from that. So she makes an excellent point. And looking at all those different layers that came in was actually making the whole thing need to puff up even bigger, but it wasn't going to be doing anything productive in my mind, because we're super practical out here in rural areas where you have to use all of that to get that fiber in the ground. So looking for contractors right now, our last bid came in a little bit higher than what our engineered plan was. And my Reconnect 1 still hasn't started. So 2.5 years of waiting for environmental reviews to come through. We are going to be able to get started soon. And the cost of that fiber is, it can be had if you pay the premium price for that. We have our whole front yard is stacked up with some of that getting ready to start, but we need so much more. And then finding a contractor that is, that's going to be very tough. The workforce, we're doing some training things right now, looking for some of those apprenticeship programs. We have some fiber splicers in-house. We're training other people to do that. We have construction crew, but we need a bigger, just there's so many things hitting that right now. Right. That every one of those things is honestly, that's right. What keeps us up at night.
And Lee, thank you for raising the I word, the inflation word. That was on my list, and I'm glad you raised it, because I mean it's kind of a double whammy or triple whammy if you add in all the red tape issues. But the inflation costs are adding 10 to 30, and that's kind of conservative, Jill, from the numbers we've been looking at in our reporting, to this additional, I guess 20% is kind of the benchmark that people tend to talk about on taxation. So you're basically taking a 30 to 50% additional bite out of your funding round. We have a question here from Bert Cohen. Do you recommend that ISPs or munis looking to construct and operate a broadband network should be factoring in tax expenses into the cost of a project when applying for a deployment grant? How do you react to that, Leif and Jill?
Jill could probably answer it better. I mean, from the perspective of someone who's living it. But I would just say that we've heard from many of our members who are forced to do so that you do have to factor in those costs when you're applying for a grant or for a loan. And it kind of just lessons learned as they have seen these programs unfold, and the economic situation on the ground, whether that's inflation or supply chain. So it's absolutely at this point become common sense, something that our members have to factor in. So Jill can probably speak to it more directly.
Yeah, yes, looking through all of those and to just not be surprised at the end, because putting something in, you always have to look at, because we all of the property tax we pay on that as well. We pay property tax on every fiber under the ground in all of our townships. Maybe people don't realize that as well. So paying a tax on top of the money, trying to put it out there in the first place, you have to be aware of how that's going to look in your pro forma. So you put those numbers together based on where you're going, just so you're not surprised. If it is a muni though, because they're going to have that benefit of the local government as they apply, then they would not have that. So in partnerships, which we have many, we have, talked to different municipalities and some of our tribal neighbors. They are in a different situation. So I guess that would also come into play on who's applying for the grant, and maybe looking at that as one of those reasons, who is the applicant.
We do have another question about, the right or wrong way to structure government grants for broadband. And this questioner says that the government subsidies for broadband should be made through means-tested manners, like a voucher, right? I mean, obviously the Lifeline program, an example of that funding is direct. It's not direct to the consumer, it's to the ISP, but it's on behalf of a consumer as if it were a voucher type program. So what do you think of the questioner's argument that subsidies should be means tested and be done through vouchers instead of putting the government in the role of having, whether it's the federal government or the state government, because it'll be the state broadband offices that are picking the winners in this particular program, the BEAD program. But what do you think of that observation? Let's go Jill first and then Leif.
Well, the states will choose the winners, but the states have to use the NTIA rules. So you're still going back to the federal rules on what they can and can't do. They can shape it to have more impact of closer to the ground, but they're still going to be able to have, they're still going to have some of those, because we just now took some of the in between and we're trying to push that out. So there are some treasury rules that we have to follow in Kansas. I do like the voucher base. So instead of sending it to the providers and with some assumed waste or maybe bad actors happening there, we do have a lot more players on the field right now, we have noticed, and trying to come in there. So that's a valid point. And the trying to come through the ACP $30 credit that was $50 during COVID, tribal remained at $75. I live on the border of Kansas and Oklahoma, whereas Oklahoma is considered tribal for both Lifeline and for ACP. That's a huge difference. If a Lifeline is still at $25 and the ACP is still at $75, that's a $100 credit, that can go very far in Oklahoma. half a mile this way on the Kansas side of the line, the Lifeline is barely present and the ACP is only $30. Averaging those to get it at $50 universally for everyone would be so much easier so that it's not state by state like that. We have some communities that are on the border or across the border. So how you handle that person is they are the ones that have to log on to the NLAD and get all of their application done. We don't do that for them. I see the point. I see pros on both sides of that. You're not picking winners and losers among providers that way, but at the same time, you still need a provider to have any sort of incentive to go out there and serve. That's the reason companies like Ken Okla are here. There was zero incentive back in the 30s for any big provider to serve. They weren't here. They didn't want to be here. So getting an incentive to come out to rural areas, why would a company go out and build that without that? So I would love to have a further, I guess, conversation with Brett on that.
Leaf, what is your thought about the general point about vouchers versus funding through a program like BEAD?
Well, I think we have to back up a little bit and understand
Please
what we're talking about. So with BEAD, Reconnect, Capital Projects Fund, ARPA Fund, CARES Act, state funding, a lot of these things we're talking about the upfront cost to deploy the network. And in such a system, no, we don't believe vouchers would work. I can't even imagine how you would send the money to the individuals and they decide how much of that goes to allow a provider to install the network. If we're talking about, it just creates so much uncertainty and it ignores the economic realities of trying to serve these areas. That's why these programs are structured as grants, and they do go to the provider based on the requirements established by Congress, implemented by the agencies and implementing them. So we do think that is the best system and the only system that makes economic sense for deployment purposes. If you're talking about how do we make broadband affordable for individuals, then yes, we have the Lifeline program link up for that, and the Affordable Care program that's in existence now that Congress recently created and made permanent. So I think it's just important to distinguish that those are two different problems we're trying to solve. And in one case, vouchers, for lack of a better word, do work, and our members, customers use them, and we support those programs. But if you're talking about for deployment purposes, no, we would disagree.
Mm-hmm. I want to make sure we cover just kind of strategy, tactics, how this is going to go down, so to speak. And I think we haven't said it directly, but I think the argument I've heard, Leaf, when asked about, well, should all these other issues be included, right? Regulations, and well, that's kind of already been decided, right, by Congress. And you could argue this tax question has already been decided by not raising it, but I think the argument is, well, if there's all these costs that are being hit in inflation, Congress can't legislate. Congress can't legislate against inflation, but it can certainly override the tax payment. So would that be your argument? Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, Leaf? And what's your percentage odds that this thing will pass by the time Congress expires?
Oh boy, this is being recorded too, so whatever, I'm really on the hook if I'm wrong. But there's a really quick history. I think it's important to figure out how we got here. And so, you back up to the 1950s, I believe it was, when regulation or the determination was first made whether or not such grants would be deemed as gross income or not. It was in a sense because they thought a gift from the community or a government or a civic institution to a provider really was something that helped the community and not just the provider. It wasn't until 2017 when Congress decided, for a variety of reasons, that money from government agencies to private entities, would be deemed as taxable. But that was a part of a larger tax reform package. And I think those that worked on that bill would want everyone to understand that that was one decision amongst many decisions, and many entities, even if they had to pay a tax on that grant, still maybe had a net benefit from that law that was implemented. So then you have to fast forward to the fact that no one knew we're actually going to undergo a pandemic, and Congress quickly realized that we have, well, many of them already knew that, but quickly realized they have to act soon to get all these unconnected people connected. An issue that just simply amplified by everyone staying home from work or doing their schoolwork at home. And so now I think it's just important to think that it's just time to revisit the issue. And I think many members of Congress have realized that, at least for broadband grants, this is something that they would like to address. And so whether the odds of it, I guess I'm hedging my bets by saying 50-50, because the 50% positive of me does want to say that it's bipartisan. There are really key senators that are on board with this. It makes sense. It does solve a problem that they want solved. I don't think there's a lot of opposition to it. The other 50%, the negative is, it is Congress. It's very difficult to get anything passed. It depends on what the political climate is after the election, if there's still a willingness to work together and put a large package together. And that is so uncertain. I hate to really make a guess on what's going to happen there. And even with issues that are widely supported, they could fall victim to some of those political disputes. So I put it at even.
Okay, let me ask the same question of you, Jill.
The chances of it happening?
Yeah, the chances of it happening, and whether you think that it opens a broader Pandora's box of, well, why don't we address these regulations? Why don't we address the red tape issues that Congress may feel tempted to weigh into?
So if you put all of that on the table, and what could I do now? What could they do now? And what could they do quickly? I think that does rise to the top of in their wheelhouse of power of what they could change for the greater good for this moment. But those other things that are already like kind of set in place, or we've been seeing those coming out in the rulemaking, those do feel a little more set in stone, very changeable if they would address that. But it looks like that could take it a whole nother year, which maps alone will take at least another year. So maybe there is time for that then. I think the most doable would be the taxable issue now.
Okay. We have a question from our YouTube watcher, Chris Eyestone. Thank you for making them, and we can receive them from other platforms. Chris asks, any sense from panelists on whether NTIA, of course, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is running the BEAD program, whether the NTIA walks back some of the more onerous implementations of IIJA around prevailing wages, fiber preference, et cetera, given the inflation issues discussed earlier. Again, we've kind of talked about maybe some of the law decisions have been made, but have the regulation kind of rollbacks been fully vetted? Leif, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, it's kind of, again, it's dangerous to talk about what the odds of that happening are. I can tell you that we as an association and our members have, and I know a lot of other people have as well, had those conversations with NTIA, and I think they are doing a great job thus far of putting this together. I mean, they're in a difficult situation. Some of these are obviously political considerations and constituent groups who favor having one thing or the other in there, and they have to weigh all those options. But I can tell you from a provider perspective, we do continue to explain to them, if you do A, the result will be, B, and making sure that they are not caught off guard, but when the dollars do start to flow and the grants are offered, what the result of some of those decisions may or may not be. And so all I can really tell you is we're doing our best to educate them that our members are small providers with limited resources and staff. They're out there locally owned, trying to serve their customers as best they can. And to the extent that whether it's NTA or the other agencies that also have to stand up similar programs can help streamline some of this, it would certainly go a long ways to helping our members do what they're really trying to do.
Jill, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I think they've been, so starting with what, an office of 5 and then completely being, at task for this, coming up with those first rules. I do hope as anybody would, is once you find out new information and you can tweak that and make that better, I have all hope that they can do that, because some of them are onerous and that some of them are, maybe it wasn't their intention, but they are going directly opposite of the intent of getting broadband out faster. And I don't know if those ideas come as the discussion groups present them. And then, like Leif said, if you could go and lay it all out there, pros and cons, this is really the effects that would take, and maybe that wasn't taken in consideration, and really measuring those and making those the best of both, and really coming out with some honed in rules of how many roadblocks did that create, or how many freeways did that create, to get there faster.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for your answers and for your questions. Obviously, there are people who view that the NTIA project is not a good project, and we're hearing from some of them in the chat windows. If anyone would like to add anything on that, I'll give you that opportunity. Let's have final comments from Leif, and then from Jill, and then I'll close this out. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Like I said, in some ways, this is one of the least complicated telecom issues, and most telecom issues are quite complicated. I mean, there's an amount of money that has been put forth to help get those unconnected connected. Roughly 21% of that's going to come off the top, and with that, like Jill said, it's going to lead to the most difficult to serve people continuing to not be served. We appreciate the work of Senators Warner and Moran to get this done, and on behalf of our members, we're going to spend the next several weeks in this Congress advocating to get it done. And to anyone on this call who agrees, we welcome you doing the same on Capitol Hill. So thank you, Drew.
Great. Thank you, Leif. Jill, any final thoughts you want to share with us?
Yeah, I might share. CanOkla has done that fixed wireless as efficiently as possible for 20 years. And we also do fiber, and we also have some copper we're transitioning. Fiber is the durable 30-year way. So that is why the money is looking to go that route. And so I'm trying to kind of put some cost there as a final thought. Over 20 years, you are spending more on fixed wireless than you spend on fiber. Doesn't sound right, but it is. I do numbers all the time. So once you're looking at the 30-year view, fiber wins out. And I think looking at all of I'm glad this was introduced. This does seem like a nice 20% right there to get a little more toward where we're going, and then addressing all of the other issues that are built into those grant opportunities. I do appreciate that the NTIA awards through BEAD are going down to a closer level through the states that do know their topography better and what they're dealing with. Like the state of Kansas, we have it's really two different states in one, if you look at Western Kansas versus Eastern. So there's a lot of things to consider there. And I know with the NTIA viewpoint of how do we serve all in a bigger, wider net for simplicity, it is much more complicated than that. And if it were cheap and easy, we wouldn't be here today. It would all be done. So.
Well, that will have to be our last word, with the exception of the last number, that is S5021. That is the Senate bill number of this particular measure by Senators Warner and Moran, S5021. Thank you to our panelists, Leif Overson and Jill Kearney, of both from Washington and from outside of Washington. Reminder that we are looking forward to a great lineup over the next few weeks, and of course a lead up to our Digital Infrastructure Investment Washington. On behalf of our two guests and this topic, I'm Drew Clark of Broadband Breakfast. We'll see you next Wednesday at 12.